Continuing with our infatuation with my great hero Terence McKenna, we're going to look at him talking about time, but not time in a TikTok it's 3:30 type of way, more in the way that Kate Didcock, who in the comments, we told you we'll respond to your comments, here we are responding to yours, Kate. Russell, I found this idea of time speeding up fascinating. More going on, more events going on simultaneously, and therefore time has sped up. Please can you help break this down? What was Terence McKenna talking about? Evolution in general, and perhaps the doomsday clock? From this video in 1999, Terence McKenna talks at length about this subject. I have not watched it myself yet, and there is a degree of complexity in the subject. Those of you that like this might want to watch the Dark Matter Matters video that I did the other day, and you'll be fascinated in some of our videos with Jeremy Corbell talking about UFOs. But this, time, along with space, of course, is one of our kind of fundamental understandings of the way that reality operates. Let's see what Terence McKenna is saying. And thanks for your question, Kate.
Which lasts longer? 1,000,000 years in which nothing happens, or 10 seconds with 50,000 events crammed into it? In other words, really time is only experienced by the events which occur within it. And I maintain that the early universe had very little going on, and consequently, time moved very, very slowly. The character of time as we approach the present.
The idea of time not being objective and absolute, even though that still sounds really weird, wacky and crazy to me, is actually part of accepted scientific discourse, isn't it? The theory of relativity is determined or defined by the idea that time moves differently in different places and is affected by gravity and mass. Now, what I find provocative about what McKenna is saying there is the idea that we are so immersed in reality as we understand it that we are unable to determine anything beyond what is ubiquitous and ordinary. Don't you worry about him, he's meant to be there. He'll walk past every 5 seconds. There's been a glitch in the Matrix. You watch, he'll walk past in a minute, he'll be wearing a hat. He'll come by in a half hour as an old man, and then in 33 minutes he'll come back as like a little boy. It's going to freak you right out. My point is that we only know the reality that we're experienced with. We only understand the laws that we've been introduced to. And Terence McKenna is saying that time might be different according to the amount of events that are taking place within that time, the amount of experiences that are taking place, perhaps the number of conscious entities that are experiencing those events. This, for me, is extraordinary and fascinating.
There are more and more physical domains and energetic domains in which change can occur. So when I say time is speeding up, what I mean really is that more and more is happening. Somehow this concept of connectivity is intimately linked to the concept of complexity. And so really what I'm saying is that the universe is getting its act together. It's connecting the dots. It's bringing everything into co-relationship with everything else. And somehow it does this through the production of consciousness. Consciousness is this integrative function in biology which takes data which may appear profoundly unrelated, and in fact brings it into some kind of a congruent relationship.
That's pretty crazy, isn't it? That consciousness is an agent for congruence and cohesion. I suppose what that means practically is that as agents of consciousness ourselves, we can make machines, we can organize nature, we can interact with other conscious entities and create, in McKenna's phrase, more coherent dimensions. Some of these ideas sound so abstract and complex if your life is basically predicated by, I got up, I went out here. Like say me today, I've got daughters, so I have to get up, get them to school, put stuff in their lunch boxes. But even yesterday, man, when I was out with them, I took them through one of them car washes, as kids I thought would like that. They didn't like it as much as I did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I thought that it was the absolute pinnacle of life experience to go in a car wash. Anyway, they were sort of bored during the car wash. But when we got back home and put on an episode of Peppa Pig, and the first episode of Peppa Pig was Peppa Pig going into a car wash, and my little daughter went, look, they're in a car wash. And like how I'd noticed things unfolding on the walk, a woman in front of us with her little girl picking a bee up with a bit of paper in the street. I started to feel that there's a sublime, literally subliminal poetry to reality, that we are attuned to but one level of potential states, and our material rational world enforces those states. McKenna points out, using psychedelics and sometimes even mathematics, that there are different programs running simultaneously, and the I Ching, the Chinese method of fortune telling and philosophical diagnosis that I believe he talks about elsewhere in this video, is also based on the idea that you can drop anchors into different levels of reality, or you can throw up aerials into different frequencies of consciousness. And William James, the theologian, believed that all potential realms of consciousness are continually accessible, separated merely by veils. You know, you can understand that from a perspective of psychedelics. If you were to engage in some sort of plant medicine or psilocybin-based experience now, you would see things that you wouldn't otherwise see. But also, what about if you fell in love? You know, look how different reality feels when serotonin or oxytocin or dopamine or lack thereof suddenly introduce layers of reality and meaning that are inaccessible elsewise.
This idea then of a time being a resonance created by other times, not immediately before or after it, as in scientific causality, but somehow a day centuries ago, centuries in the future, come together to create an interference pattern that creates the unique moment. So that was one of the basic assumptions. And then the structure on which this all was hung was the I Ching. And what is the I Ching? Well, it's a very ancient method of divining and predicting the future, based on the idea that every moment can be symbolized by a unique ideogram, which is somehow its essence, much in the way that science believes you can explain all nature with 108 elements. The ancient Chinese took the position that time itself was made of elements.
Terence takes you deep, don't he? And I suppose we don't have the instruments to receive and understand time in the manner that McKenna is currently discussing them. But human beings have long been fascinated with the idea that our experience of linear time may not be absolute. It's something you see a lot in science fiction, and even in sort of like, forms of fiction that are pretty popular. There's a really good episode of Rick and Morty, for example, where the screen splits into various fragments, and they sort of reference Schrodinger's cat, and I'm sure that someone that's an expert in Schrodinger's theories will be infuriated by the use of Rick and Morty's storytelling approach to it. But if you're watching Marvel's Loki, at the moment, it talks a lot about time and layers of time and streams of time, as if we are becoming fascinated with the idea that our reality could be synthesized, that there could be various parallel universes, that we have to become open to the idea that, that, as McKenna himself said, reality is not only stranger than we suppose, it is stranger than we can suppose. We don't even have the ability to comprehend how unusual it might be. And of course, when you reflect on it for just a moment, that becomes obvious, because if you think of our understanding of reality in relation to a cat or a dog, or even human beings 100, 200, 500, 10,000 years ago, why would we now assume that we are finally at the apex? It must go on to in fathomless degrees, to the point where we would be like single cellular creatures trying to comprehend this tangerine or this laptop, or the potential that time may concertina, expand, reflect and refract. All ideas that seem implausible because we don't have experiential knowledge of them. But even Robert McFarlane, who came on my podcast Under the Skin, talked about deep time. He talked about when you're in subterraneous caverns, you see sort of rock formations that cause you to feel like a rock might fall on your head. And he sort of says, in a way, it is falling on your head, but it's just falling over thousands of years. It's still attached to the ceiling. Deep time. Everything we experience is experienced within the scale of our intelligence, the scale of our size, and within the framework of our limitations. And the reason I love Terence McKenna is he is a voyager who is willing to take expeditions, whether psychedelically or intellectually, into realms that would ordinarily be inaccessible. And I see it more than an intellectual onanism. I see it as a potentially a way of imagining new realities into being, which is precisely what people like Tesla, Einstein, Steve Jobs, whoever have done. You imagine realities and you bring it down. This can be relevant to you if you're an artist or a creative person or a scientist or a mathematician or whatever. I've recently watched a video about the limitations of mathematics and how it sort of ultimately leads you into peculiar cul-de-sacs and odd contradictions. Anyway, that's my series of videos on the great Terence McKenna, a man I could talk about for a lot longer. We're certainly considering getting Dennis McKenna on Under the Skin, the great late man's wonderful and brilliant brother. And tell us who you'd like to see another series of these talks on. Please subscribe to the Awakening channel. If you want to come and see me do live work, you should sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com. You should subscribe to my Luminary podcast, Under the Skin, where I chat a lot of stuff, and Above the Noise, where I don't chat at all. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. Thank you.